Hi everyone, this is the Caribbean Skeptic Secularist out of the beautiful island of Barbados. We are going to start now. Yes, so welcome everyone to the Caribbean Skeptic Secularist live. And tonight we want to look at speaking and writing diversely, and we have a special guest to join us to do that. Yeah. Woo! So, welcome. I want to welcome first those in the live chat. SR, welcome. Secular Rarity, welcome to the show. Ooh, yes, thanks for being here. And you're the first. Great. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much for letting me know that the audio is good. Yes, and clear. Thank you very much. Now, yes, we have a special guest to discuss about speaking and writing diversely. You may not have heard of the person, or you may have. And her name is Vanessa Marie. And she is going to start off with telling us a bit. Welcome, Vanessa, to the show.
Hi,
Hi, hi, the African humanists. Welcome, welcome.
hi everyone. Thanks for having me on here today. Um, like Phil said, I am Vanessa Marie. I go by Vanessa Marie Books online, on YouTube, and other platforms. I am a YA fantasy, paranormal, and horror writer, an indie publisher, and creative entrepreneur. So I do many different things. I wear many different hats. But one of my main focus is helping writers to learn how to write diverse characters for their stories. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm excited to be here and talk about diversity and inclusion.
Great. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you very much for being here with us. Yes, sometimes persons, we hear people making statements that are outside certain minority groups and marginalized groups make statements like, why do we need to use terminology, the terminology that those groups or persons want to be identified as? And they will claim, well, the persons, people are people. But why? Why is it important for us to address the person according to what they think, what they feel in some cases, as in the case of the LGBTQ, how they identify, and other groups, how they identify, to use the correct terminology for them.
Mhm. Um, so I will say, why this is important, why we need to be inclusive, especially in terms of our language and the words that we use, um, is because, well, I believe language is very powerful. What our words are very powerful, and you know, we haven't always had language in the past that has been inclusive of everyone, and how they identify. Um, and so that's one reason I believe this is so important, is to have uh, to be inclusive of everyone, um, and to make a create a safe space for everyone to be included, because a lot of times these um, marginalized groups have been, oppressed. They have been, they've had violence committed against them. And I think that it mainly surrounds this, it's mainly surrounded around this fear of not understanding and not knowing that person. And I think if we can take away, like learn more about different groups of people, um, learn more about different marginalized groups, we start to take away that fear. And when you start to take away that fear and realize, hey, this is just another person, another human being, just like me, we can start to actually make change and embrace the differences that make us us.
Great, great. So, in terms of, okay, what you just said there, is it always that when you're writing, you use that correct terminology for the individual, the character, or can it vary based on, if, say, for example, you're writing a novel or talking about how it was used in the past and so on?
Um, can you explain that one more time? Because
Right.
that's
In terms of, is it when you're writing,
mhm,
and say you're writing a novel,
right.
and you're writing a novel set in the past, do you
Yeah.
use that terminology that will be used for those persons, those characters in the past, or is that the right thing to do, or well?
Right. Because you know, our language changes over
Hmm.
time, right? That's one thing
Hmm.
we have to remember and think about. Language changes over time, and words that um, may have been used for a group of people in the past may not be acceptable today, right? So, if we're talking about writing historical fiction, right?
Hmm.
And you're asking about whether it would be a good thing to use the terminology that has been used in the past, in
Yeah.
previous, to make it historically accurate, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah, so for that, and let me preface this by saying you are going to always find a variety of different opinions about this question and this topic. So not everyone is going to agree with how to approach it.
Mm.
I will say for myself, what I think is if you are writing a historical fiction,
Hmm.
um, you can use certain words that have been used in the past, but it depends on, I would say, how um, you go about using it, right? How you go about using it, and also, uh, I guess, how often it gets used,
Hmm.
right? Because, um, for example, we let's take within the Black community historically during times of slavery. You know, the N word has
Yeah, I
been,
was thinking same thing. Yeah, yeah.
so historically, um, and the N word has been used for someone who is Black in the past, right? And this is actually interesting because it gets into. I actually had a client earlier this year, a few months back, that I worked with, who was writing a historical fiction set during the times of slavery. It was a historical fiction, but also modern day. It was like a blend of genres. But the chapters where they're in the past, you know, this writer had wanted me to, look at the way Black characters were portrayed in his story. And one of the things that I focused on that he was concerned about was the language and how the language is used. Um, and I noticed in his story, of course, he doesn't want to use the N word, um, even though it's the scenes are set in the past. And what I kind of gave him suggested to him was using the term Negro, because historically Negro was the more polite way to refer to African Americans back then. It wasn't, back then it wasn't seen as a slur as the other N word, right? And so I was like, if you have a white character back then, and you want to have them be respectful or more, they're not. If you have a character that's not the typical racist white character that you would see back then, that's one way to do it, would be using the term Negro. Now, it also comes up that when you are talking about language, you also want to look at whether you're using certain words in the dialogue or the in the narrative, right? Because that's one thing that people will talk about and say, when they refer to historical fiction, they will say, but this is how people back then talked. This is, the way they spoke, the words they used, and yes, that's true. So if you are using a word like that in dialogue, it makes sense that your character would say something like that in dialogue. With narrative, narrative is, anything that's not dialogue. So with the narrative, you have more of a flexibility in how you write things. So you don't necessarily have to use those words in narrative. And for certain words, it would be better not to use them at all. Right? But again, this is
before you continue, now you said that there's certain words that's not used at all.
In narrative.
In terms of in the narrative, right? Like the word Negro, is it now today in this modern day seen as something derogatory? They're using that term Negro.
Is it
derogatory to use that word
towards
yeah?
In today's time period, I would say yes, it is. Again, I can't speak for every single person. Everyone's different, but a lot of people do view that as negative or derogatory today.
Right.
Yeah,
And someone in the chat said there's a fine line between what's historically, Cynthia
acceptable.
says,
Yeah,
yeah, historically accepted and what's versus what's offensive.
yeah,
Um, yeah, because I know, as you say, some persons bend even before historical narrative. If certain words are used where it's used in the, because I was going to ask you about the quotation. If
mm,
you're quoting somebody speaking in the
yeah,
narrative,
yeah.
right? And they're using, let's say, the massa uses the word, then it is writing from that perspective. But in the actual narrative, where the person is describing, doing descriptive writing as part of the narrative, then using that word will not be appropriate. But there are some people, regardless of whether it is written, if it's written in the when
Dialogue.
it's written in the dialogue, they will still keep noise. Oh, you shouldn't be using that word. You shouldn't be using that word. But it has to be looked at within the context
Mm,
of what is being written. The context is important.
yes.
That's it, right? So some persons don't really look at the context of how things are being used, and that's why there's a lot of confusion and disparity and unnecessary argument
And
about things that are written sometimes.
right. And that's why I say, everyone is going to look at this topic differently. And so
Mm-hmm.
I can't speak for every person about this topic. And, even in one of my writing groups, we've had discussions on this topic as well. And,
Mm-hmm.
people are not going to agree. Some people feel very, very strongly about never using those words, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's in dialogue or narrative. Um, there's always ways to uh, work around it, or write
Yeah.
it more creatively so you don't have to use those words. And then some people will say, depending on the time period, the historical
Mm-hmm.
context, then it's fine as long as you don't overdo it and you're not like using it every other sentence or something, right?
Right. Yeah.
So there's a delicate balance that, and not everyone's going to agree about
I
that.
agree. Yeah. Yes. That's very true. Um.
I will say, I
Mm-hmm.
will add that depending on how you do it and the words you use, it can
Right.
be pretty powerful and impactful as well.
Mm-hmm.
I actually
Yes.
talk about I talk about that in one of my writing diversity videos I did
Mm-hmm.
with an author, Ryan Douglas, because he used a certain word in his story that would be seen as offensive towards the queer community,
Mm-hmm.
um, a community that he's a part of as well. But the way he used it in the story, we talked about this because I thought the story, it made it more impactful, and it gave you a really strong, um, like gut wrenching feeling when you
Mm-hmm.
that scene. So
Okay. Oh, great, great. And by the way, those in the live chat, if you have any questions as we are going along, um, um, on the particular sections that we're dealing with, you can type questions to us at the Caribbean the Caribbean Skeptic Secularist. Okay, so type your questions to the at symbol, the Caribbean Skeptic Secularist. Okay, and we will try to answer as we go along so that we don't, so that at least we can cover that question if it's related, especially to what we're discussing at the point in time. Right. So moving on, let's look at using appropriate identification. for persons how they want to be identified as. What are your suggestions as how we should go about approaching this?
For how someone wants to identify as in terms of their pronouns,
Yeah,
or
how person should approach them, and looking at the pronouns from the person that is not the person that is identifying saying I am they them, but the person that is speaking to them or addressing them.
Mhm. Well, the most simple and respectful way is just to ask how would they like to be referred to as. And you can also share with them your how you identify, what pronouns you use, so they feel comfortable and safe sharing their pronouns. And it's just a simple matter of asking, you know,
Right.
if you're
So what?
not sure.
Yeah. So what will you say to someone who is making a claim that oh, these persons just want these to be identified as this to gain attention or to just for attention gain? How will you respond to someone who is making such a claim?
Yeah, just for attention gain, right? I
Yeah.
think there are much better ways you can gain attention than just having different pronouns. And here's the thing: the you know, I want to be careful with what I say here, because I do not speak for the trans community or the non-binary community. I do identify as cisgender, which means I identify with um, the gender I was assigned to at birth, which is female. Um, so I want to be careful with what I say here. But the transgender community and the non-binary community, um, the queer community in general, but
Mhm.
especially trans and non-binary people, experience a lot of discrimination and violence and bigotry towards them.
Mhm.
Um, and that is not the the violence and the bigotry and the discrimination that they face is not something anyone would willingly go
Mhm.
through, if this wasn't if it wasn't true to who they are, their core.
Mhm. Mhm.
um, I don't know anyone, is there any one of us who would go through what their community goes through just to get attention?
Attention. Yeah.
um, you know, it's for a lot of them, for many of them, this is a life or death situation.
Yes.
It's not safe just for them to be who they are, especially depending on where they live.
Especially in you see like in a lot of highly religious countries,
Mhm.
say Muslim, even some Christian countries in Africa, on the African continent,
Even,
persons wants to identify as LGBTQ,
mhm,
they are harmed,
yeah,
or even in the case where like in northern Nigeria, they're stoned or locked up
yeah,
life, and in some countries they're locked up. So it is, as you said, it is not people trying to gain attention
Right.
because there's a lot of risk, and even being discriminated in even the United States and even in Barbados and other highly religious countries like the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know of trans woman who went for an interview. She told me, she related this to me. She went for an interview. Interview was going quite fine until she said, "I'm a trans woman." Then everything went downhill from there,
Mm.
and she didn't get the job.
Yeah.
But the attitude just totally changed. So
Mm-hmm.
there is a lot of discrimination when and persons putting themselves out there. That's why we have to try to normalize these things,
Yeah.
because people have misconceptions about people, and sometimes it happens through superstition, through the religion co-opting these bad ideas and even promoting them in their doctrines and teaching, and then people are looked down upon. Because I remember being when I was younger, I was told, "Oh, watch out for the homosexuals; they like to trouble boys and all sorts of crap." And
Mm.
it wasn't true, given this false sense of that they are pedophiles. That was the idea, that well, homosexuals are pedophiles, which was a bunch of lies,
Yeah.
and I mean, I had to deconstruct from that, coming up in the Christian fundamentalist religion, to
Mm-hmm.
deconstruct and move away from that. And then you see people are being, um, as I just described, like the trans woman being discriminated against in jobs, and people avoiding them, for the most part.
Yeah. And that this just goes back to what I said in the beginning, that I think a lot of times there's fear of what we don't know, what we don't understand. And so that's why I really wanted want to do this work and am so
Mhm.
involved in this work, because I want to um, provide a way for people to get to know people that are different, and
Yeah.
so take away that fear and
Mhm.
help them realize, they're just like you and me. And
You're
so,
right.
um, hopefully we can, uh, by doing that, take away those stigmas and the
Mhm.
discrimination and the violence towards them.
Yes, definitely so. Because it not only it affects, as you said, a lot of marginalized groups, even the atheists, using the word atheist. In Barbados, I can tell about Barbados, using the word atheist, and people have this thing because people assume that because a lot of persons claim to be Christian, that or you go to church, or you or this, and they take for granted the other persons in your pluralistic society. And I think even that's what's happening over there in the United States. The laws and so on that are being changed to discriminate against people who are not of a particular religious group.
Yeah,
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 right. And so some people are afraid to use, as I said, say I'm a lesbian, I'm queer, I am homosexual, I'm gay,
hmm,
I'm an atheist. You might get a little bit agnostic, but those terminologies, people have this negative. So the more persons that speak out, and I mean, sure, people, look, we are good people just like anyone else.
right.
Yeah, they have some or do
Yeah,
crap, but as people, but we
hmm,
are good people. And B, especially when you have as part of your worldview, and atheism is not a worldview, it's just saying, um, you know, that you don't accept that gods exist because there's not enough evidence or so. But
Right.
your worldview as a humanist, treating people with dignity, respect,
Right.
where they actually deserve it, um, and helping people. All of that is part of humanism. That's part of secularism, and for not imposing a particular dogma on everybody, saying, "Oh, it's my dogma. You can put it on everybody else."
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, but we look at what is best for everyone. Uh, can
Yeah.
you explain for us? Um, I've heard this about person first language versus identity first language. Can you explain that for us? What we mean by first person, person first language, and identity first language?
Yes. So this came up when we were kind of talking about disability and different terminology within the disability community. And something I brought up was uh, person first versus identity first language.
Mhm.
And basically, what that means is person. Person first language is language where you uh, the person is the uh, the subject uh, before their identity,
So,
whereas
can you
which
give an example
I,
there of
I
that
am
part? Oh, okay.
gonna get to that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and identity first language would be putting the identity before the person. So the examples that I have that I gave before would be if you were to say, I am autistic versus I have autism, or
Mm-hmm.
I am a disabled person versus I have a disability.
Mm-hmm.
So I am autistic would be identity first language, but in the um, identity first there.
First, yeah.
Um, Same with I am a disabled person. That
Mm-hmm.
would be identity first.
Mm-hmm.
Person first would be saying, I have autism or I have a disability. So you put in the person before you recognize the identity.
Mm-hmm.
So, does that make sense? I hope. If anyone has
Yes.
questions, I can
Mm-hmm.
try to clarify.
Great, great. Yeah, because we sometimes okay, like the so you will have what in terms of how will this play out with, there are some people that are small people, um and that terminology I think is used in the United States, small people, right? In the past they will have used the word midget and dwarf. Can you, which of those terms are considered derogatory, and which ones are the ones that is better, is more correct to use?
hmm Um, well, you don't, midget would be the derogatory one that you don't want to use. You can say, this person is a small or little person. I think some use the
Mm-hmm.
term little people. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that's one that you could use. I would always say, again, going back to um, just referring to someone by what they prefer. and simply asking, what do they prefer? So, they may say, little person or small person is fine, or they may give you a different terminology that they go by. So if you want to be respectful, I would, always say to ask, but definitely I would say be conscious of the ones, the terminology that you don't want to use, which midget is one.
Right. So let's say we're having a conversation, talking with someone, and we see a small person or a little person. We're talking with someone and describing them. So the correct terminology, then, saying that you might not know, or the person might be in the distance, is it then best then to use, say, a little person or a person of small stature?
Yeah. So someone who, small stature or little person. Yeah.
Okay, right. In terms of,
And again, I don't
mhm,
speak for the people in these groups, but this is just based on my knowledge and experience. So
right. So let's say, okay. So what are some of the when we're talking about having a physical disability, mental disability, what should we not use, and what is the correct term to use?
um, so sometimes that you wouldn't want to use if you're speaking of disability. Um, Definitely crippled is one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Handicap, for mental disabilities, um, the R word is always one that people kind of throw out, which is not appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Words you would use instead would be person with a disability or disabled person,
Mm-hmm.
wheelchair user. Um,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you can, for uh, mental or cognitive disabilities, you can just say, cognitive or intellectual disability.
Yeah.
Or just if you know the specific disability, what it is, you can use that specific term, that word. Um,
Right.
so if you know they have Down syndrome, you can say Down syndrome. Um, Also, going back to one thing with terminology and stuff, when when you are speaking of the autism community,
Mm-hmm.
autistic community, um, what another word to or another term to avoid would be saying Asperger's syndrome. That
Uh,
is one that has been that's a terminology that was used
mm-hmm.
previously to
Mm-hmm.
describe some autistic people,
Yeah.
is Asperger's syndrome, but Asperger has ties to Nazi
Oh,
regime soldiers. So
what?
yeah, the autistic
Oh.
community, from people I've heard in that community,
Mm-hmm.
do not want others to use Asperger's because it's tied to
Listen,
that.
wow. I did not know that.
Well,
My goodness.
I believe the scientists. I
Mhm.
don't know if he was a psychologist or what, but the scientist who discovered Asperger was a Nazi, so that's why.
Oh, oh, okay. I know. See, I know that.
And uh,
Ah,
the disability is named after him, so his name.
okay. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I can see why. I can see why you don't want to be identified. Yes, with that at all. The in relation to the physical disability, can somebody also say physically challenged?
Um, I I don't know that I would say challenged so much as yeah, I don't know that I'd say challenged so much as just maybe physically disabled. Um,
Okay.
but again, that goes back to who you're speaking to.
Speaking. Mm-hmm.
Because some people do have uh, issues with the word challenge, right?
Right.
And
Right.
what exactly, what exactly do we mean by challenge as well?
Mm-hmm.
Because when we talk about disability, something else to think about, which we didn't really discuss last time we talked, but something to think about is when it comes to disability, there is the medical model of disability
Mm-hmm.
and the social model of disability. So the medical model is one where the disability is viewed as a problem to be fixed, right?
Yeah.
It's viewed as, we need to find cures and treatments. We
Mm-hmm.
need to fix this issue within that person.
Mm-hmm.
This is a personal issue that this person has to overcome and fix within themselves.
Yeah.
Whereas the social model looks at disability and looks at our world and society and the environment and says, people are not disabled because of their limitations necessarily,
Limitations. Mm-hmm.
but they're disabled because society and the world is not set up and built in a way to
Mm-hmm.
allow them to be independent. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, um, one example would be like um, if someone was blind, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they go to a restaurant where they have to have someone read the menu to them or order for them.
Yeah.
That would be a limitation. But if
Mm-hmm.
they go to a restaurant and the menu has braille and they can read it themselves,
Mm.
order the food themselves, their disability is no longer a limitation or
Yeah.
a setback. So, because they're in a different environment where they can
Right.
be independent and thrive,
And right. And function
they're,
as yeah.
right, they're not seen as,
Mm-hmm.
it wouldn't be seen as disability or,
Ability or challenge. Even yeah. That's a very good point. Settler rarity, say a great point, Vanessa. um, and because no, you have said that that is why it is important for governments to take seriously because, okay, like for myself, I could say I have a physical disability. I am short sighted, very short sighted. And one of the ways that I've got to know of, well, being able to deal with that is wearing contact lenses or wearing spectacles,
Right.
right?
Right.
So people have varying degrees of quote unquote disabilities,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes persons don't really recognize that because we have, in this modern age, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
stuff that one time these things will be really considered
Right.
with disability, but no, because of scientific science and technology,
Advancement.
they
Right.
have made things to correct and to help.
Right.
And it needs to be ongoing. It's something that has to be ongoing, especially even for persons who, that's why they made wheelchairs or chairs that are motorized so people can function and do stuff for themselves. That's why we see I have Microsoft Word. There's a for those who cannot see, you have the voice or you can speak, and it writes or types what
Right.
you are speaking. So persons like I would be considered legally blind,
Mhm. Yeah. So
right?
you see, that's a perfect example because
Yeah,
without your glasses or contacts, you would be considered disabled because
yeah.
of the limitations that you would have without them.
Mm-hmm.
With the glasses or the contacts, you're able to do be independent and do things on your own. So
Right.
it's not a limitation. We're not seen as a
Yeah. But in other places where it's difficult for them to get um, glasses or spectacles or even contacts, then it will be a limitation. So, uh, uh, in that case, so I guess then limitations are socially. Um, it depends on social what was happening socially, economically in the country or in the place. Then,
Yeah, because different countries and different places are going to have more or less access to certain things. Um, so yeah, and that goes back to why I said that's the social model of disability.
mm-hmm.
It's looked through as we are our disability occurs because of limitations in our environment in our
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah, that's a very great point. Um, in terms, okay, you had made reference to on the gender identities or gender. You have cis. What's the other?
what was can you
You had talked about cis identifying with the gender you were born with. So the other one is the other.
right so the other gender identities you mean
Yeah.
okay yeah so cisgender was the term I mentioned earlier that I would use to identify myself, and that just means anyone who identifies with the sex they were assigned at birth.
And birth, right?
Um, there's also you may or may not have heard of the terms AFAB, AFAB, or
No,
AMAB, AMAB, and
no.
um, those when people use that, it also just means um, assigned female at birth or assigned male at birth.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
those are two terms that will be used as well. Obviously, there's transgender, so the person doesn't identify with the sex they were assigned at birth.
Right.
There is, or the gender they're assigned. Um, there is non-binary or
Mm-hmm.
genderqueer,
Mm-hmm.
which basically means the person uh, doesn't identify exclusively as man or woman. Um, they may identify as something in between or a combination of genders. Um, there is agender, which just means a person who does not identify um, with the gender or experience the gender. Um,
So will that, before kind of, will that be like a person who say they're asexual, or that is
well, no. So
uh,
gender identity is completely different from sexual orientation.
okay.
So if someone identifies as asexual, that would refer to their sexual orientation.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah, right. So the what about trans? Trans is the other one, so it's cis and trans too.
Yeah, so transgender is someone who does not identify with their gender at birth. So a trans woman um, may have been born biologically with the genitalia and chromosomes of a male, but transitions to female.
Mm-hmm.
And same goes for trans men, vice versa. So they were born with um, female sex organs and chromosomes and transition to male.
Mm-hmm. Right. So in terms of now terms, a non, for example, non-binary person will use what type of pronouns normally?
So non-binary, this would again depend on the person because different there are different pronouns that people
Mm-hmm.
use when they're non-binary. The most common one that I've seen that I know of is they them.
Mm-hmm.
So someone would use they them pronouns if you know uh, if they want to identify as non-binary. But
Mm-hmm.
there is there's a lot of other pronouns as well um, that you can identify with, which I won't really go into because that's not uh, that's not a topic that I've really dived into and learned too much about.
You mean the neo pronouns?
Yeah, so
Mm.
the Z
XEM and XEY in place of TH.
yeah,
They put
so
XEY and so on.
yeah, there's the XE, which I think it's pronounced Uzi, but I'm not entirely sure.
Okay.
There's I know VE.
Mm-hmm. VIE or VEI. I think it's VIE.
Yeah, they have
Mm-hmm.
there's one that's VE and then one I think might be VIE. Um, but like I said, I haven't done too much
Mm.
research into the different neopronouns. So
Right, because right. So the okay, I can read a little bit of an article that I found on those pronouns.
mhm.
It said this is from, I'm going to tell you which site. It is from a site called um, www.gires.org.uk, resources terminology. And they said those who are binary, transgender, who change their gender expression from man to woman or vice versa will change their pronouns from he, him to she, her, and vice versa. Non-binary people usually use more neutral pronouns, right? Such as you said, they, then Z, Z-I-E, H-I-R, or they may be comfortable with either she or they, or he or they. Non-gender people may use the pronoun PER from person. Titles MX or PR may be preferred to MR, MRS, Miss, or MS. Yeah, right. The so is there a term called bigender?
Yes. Um, there is by gender, uh, which that one, I want to make sure I'm remembering correctly because I haven't looked too much into by gender either.
Uh,
But I believe that is where they identify as two or more genders.
genders. Okay, right. A mix of both genders, women and man, I guess.
Yeah. Um,
Right. Okay. Mm-hmm. The there's some terminology I've heard again in relation to um, uh, a social justice problem. It's called intersectionality. What can you what is it? Intersectionality. I've heard that term.
yes. So intersectionality
Mm-hmm.
um, is a term that was created by um, Kimberly Crenshaw,
Mm-hmm.
who is a law professor at Columbia and UCLA. And
Mm-hmm.
so the way she explains intersectionality is basically a way to understand how many of our social justice systems or social justice problems, like racism and sexism, for example,
Mm-hmm.
how they overlap to create multiple layers of injustice. So she came up with this after, or the term after coming across a case where, and there was a local judge that dismissed an African American woman's claim about race and gender discrimination at a car manufacturing company. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so uh, I believe she was trying to get hired at the car manufacturing company, but didn't. And she believed that she wasn't hired because she's a black woman. And the judge kind of looked at the case and didn't agree because, he saw that the company did hire African Americans and they did hire women, but the problem is all the African Americans they hired were men and all the women they hired were white.
Oh,
So she, being a black woman, was facing a unique form of discrimination.
wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So it's like her race wasn't really a problem, but yeah, it can intersect with some other
Right.
aspect, like because she was a woman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Uh, all right, and so sometimes it is that sometimes persons might be black, gay, transsexual, black, whatever, and one or the other might affect their getting a job, for example.
Yeah. So the way, you know, with intersectionality, if you're part of multiple marginalized groups, it it presents a unique challenge and makes it hard for um, to show discrimination sometimes because you're not always sure, like, are you being discriminated because you're black or because you're queer or because you're disabled or what.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sometimes it can be a combination of all.
Right.
If you are identifying all those groups, marginalized groups, and it can be a combination of all of those, because some persons, yeah, they look at as you said, you might be black. I mean, you know how it is with the black community in the United States, how we have been seriously marginalized there, and there's a lot of white privilege. So someone might overlook, yeah, they're black, and oh, yeah, they're homosexual or they're lesbian or queer. No, we are not going to hire them. Yeah. So those that sort of intersectionality does occur in this society. Um, can you So basically, then what you were saying in terms of asking asking people what they would prefer to identify as, I think this will raise the importance of actually researching what are the different terminologies that are used.
Mm-hmm.
Is that so?
So you're asking if this will raise the chances of looking up different terminologies and the understanding.
Yeah, looking at doing the importance of researching the different terminologies to have a better understanding of the terms to use, the appropriate terms, and you can ask persons what they prefer, but you have a good understanding of, okay, this is term is used and not that one is used because this here has certain issues behind it,
Mm-hmm.
like the Asperger's syndrome.
Right. Yeah. So I think for anyone who is wanting to, um, be inclusive of other people and be respectful and understand a different perspective, I definitely think it would be important to do your own research and education on this, and
Mm-hmm.
also listen to people within that community, listen to different marginalized voices, listen to queer people in the community, um, but also just do your own education and research. I firmly believe that school, at least in America, our education system sucks. And it's, our school system does not do enough to really help us learn what we really should learn um,
Yeah.
for life. And so I'm a huge believer in being a lifelong learner and
Mm-hmm.
always continuing to do your own education. Just because you finish school, you're out of school, doesn't mean
Mean
you
that you stop
have
learning.
to learn. Right.
Right, and you need, and there's always new research and information to help you to be better. And as you said, language evolves.
Right.
So certain terms now that are using might be considered um, not the best terms to use in the future, because then it raises certain issues and that you probably would not have realized at the time,
Mm-hmm.
you know. The so that I think that will bring us to stereotypes.
Okay.
Stereotypes,
Um,
the persons have a lot of stereotype about, let's say, the black community,
mhm.
saying, oh, they won't pull up themselves by their bootstrap, or black women are this and that.
The angry black woman stereotype.
The Yeah, and they do, and they can't, they want to marry these rich people and blah blah blah, like, that person that passed away, Kevin Samuels, that had this stereotype. He was stereotyping the black women. um but there's a lot of stereotyping around, as I pointed out earlier, that homosexuals are pedophiles when that's not the case. You know, the blacks don't pull up themselves by the bootstrap.
Mm-hmm.
They are not entrepreneurs and all. Can you speak to some of the stereotypes, misrepresentation of groups?
Um, so just like examples of what different stereotypes might be within different groups. Is that
Yes, yes,
yeah?
and the one, how to avoid what? Yeah, especially ones that I need to avoid, because, as I said, people sometimes have these stereotypes and don't even realize it's actually
Mhm.
stereotypes. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's so many different stereotypes, depending on which groups you're talking about, and every group is going to have their own stereotype. But you mentioned a couple of them, right? So you were saying the stereotype of gays being predators. That's a
Mm-hmm.
stereotype even now. That's still
Mm-hmm.
it's still being pushed by certain people. You hear them say they're predators, they're groomers,
Mm-hmm.
which when I hear that is a red flag to me because uh,
Correct.
many times the ones that are saying this are the ones that are projecting. So,
Yes, they are projecting that what they are on others, and usually those are the hypocrites. And you find that happens a lot too in church circles. And the preacher preach this against this, and they're doing the actual thing that they're claiming that this other group is doing.
yeah.
And the as I told you, growing up in a fundamentalist home, Christian home, we constantly heard about that stereotyping, that sort of that, yeah, homosexuals are groomers. They didn't use the word groomers because,
Mhm.
here, but it is indicating that is the case. So they get these boys into homosexuality from a young age because they trouble them at this young age. And
Right. Um, yeah, and again, I'm not going to stereotype and generalize by saying this is everyone who says these things, but it does raise a red flag in my mind because it is quite a few of them. But going to what you were saying with stereotypes, so yes, that's one that you would hear about the queer community, the gay community. Some other stereotypes. Um, the angry black woman is one that we brought
Mm.
up. So that stereotype. There's the there's so many. There's the bisexuals are cheaters, and
Ah, wow.
it can't pick or it can't be monogamous. There's that stereotype. There's the stereotype that uh, atheists are amoral or
Oh, yes.
don't have any morals or values.
Mm.
There's that stereotype. There's so many different ones, depending on the group that you are talking about. So
Mm-hmm.
it's always important, especially in writing, if you're going to write a character from a certain group, to make sure you
Mm-hmm.
do your research and you know what stereotypes you need to make sure you're avoiding. And the thing is, a lot of times, some of these stereotypes are more subtle and they don't, um, you might not be consciously aware of them
Mm-hmm.
until they come up in your writing. So, I'm trying to think of a specific example, but like, say, something, um, something that you may be unconsciously aware of
Mm-hmm.
when writing. Like, for example, if you had a black character, right? If you have
Mm-hmm.
black characters in your story, um, and they all come from single mom homes, well, that's
Ah.
a stereotype that you might
Mm-hmm.
not have been conscious of, because there is that stereotype that black fathers are not really involved or they're not around. Um, Black women raise children on their own. So,
But in that case, usually, as you know, in the United States, because of the poverty levels, because of blacks being marginalized economically, it has created that situation where it might appear that, yeah, that black single women, a lot of their children are in jail,
mm,
right, in the prison because of economic circumstances, and it's not because of their being um, it is because of the economic circumstances that they have been placed in, the marginalization economically.
mhm.
And it's not that is the black woman is not trying to pull up herself by her bootstraps, as some of them try to claim.
Which is, yeah, another stereotype, right? And
Yeah, another stereotype,
yeah, because
right?
not there are plenty of uh, black women who raise kids who never go to jail. There
Mm-hmm.
are plenty of successful black black single women or single moms, um, and plenty of black families with fathers. So all
Yeah.
of these. The thing with stereotypes is it's always a generalization, a generalized belief
Mm-hmm.
about a particular group of people, right? And like I always say, no group is ever a monolith. So no group is, not everyone in a group is going to be exactly the same. And so we all have different experiences, different backgrounds. We come from different, we see the world through different lens. And so no single group will ever be exactly the same. And so you can't, you can't really use a generalization for everyone in the group. And it's funny because we talk about that. You can't generalize everyone in the group. And what I kind of just thought of, what that made me think of was when uh, the whole Black Lives Matter
Mm-hmm.
was coming up, and you would have people that will respond, All Lives Matter, or there's, what was it? On TikTok, actually, I see all the time
Mm-hmm.
where like someone will be talking about men, how certain men are, and of
Mm-hmm.
course you have um, commenters, men in the comments that will keep saying not all men and not all this and not all that. Same with white people, right? Whenever
Mm-hmm.
someone black says something about a white person, you will always sometimes have that one white person that will be like, not all white people, or not all white women, or it's like we know we
But the thing is, there are certain um, things that we know apply to particular group in terms of like, okay, white
know.
privilege.
Mhm.
We know definitely that there is white privilege, which is in that case that's not a stereotype, because we know from the statistics and how persons have been dealt with. There's this white privilege that is spoken about among minority groups, and it actually has happened. You're not saying that everybody does that, because there are people, white people, who realize that yes, they have white privilege and they are conscious of the white privilege and try to act differently to avoid making marginalized groups feel uncomfortable because of that privilege. The the thing we were just talking about with the single parents, the statistics show yes, there are a lot of black women, but the reason for it is not pulling up the bootstrap. We know is because of the economic disparity towards blacks, and also towards even Mexicans, even towards the Latino um, community. I mean, it's worse when I look at statistics. It's worse with for the blacks, but when there is certain privilege created, then these other groups suffer unless people with the privilege realize that privilege, I mean, needs to make changes here, right? Because so I would say that the stereotype thing, I with white privilege, I won't call that a stereotype, because there's actual evidence to show that there is white privilege because of the way things were set up from the beginning.
Right, right,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, so yeah, no, that wouldn't be one that I would say, but like there are
Mhm.
things that are stereotypes, and you always have some people in within that group that will say, well, not all this, not all.
Yeah.
And that's where I go back to, you know, that's why one, words are very important, and how you use them are very important. But two, we don't want to overgeneralize.
Overgeneralize, right.
That's why usually whenever I say something or I write something, or anytime I am maybe critiquing a
Yeah.
certain group, I will say some, not. I don't generalize and say, for instance, there's a comment I made on someone's YouTube video recently. They were, a Christian couple talking about pronouns, actually, what we're talking about today. They were talking about pronouns and why they saw it as ridiculous and why, they should be pushing back against this culture of making this a normal thing or the norm. And I don't remember my exact comment, but I know I made a point to say in my comment, some Christians, because I know there's always going to be that person that will come back and say, well, not all Christians.
Yes.
So I try to be specific and careful with the words I use.
Correct. That's so true. Are all stereotypes negative though?
No, actually, thanks for bringing that up. Because that was another point I wanted to talk about, because sometimes there are stereotypes that may be seen as positive, but that doesn't mean they can't be harmful, even unintentionally. So a stereotype, for example, that I thought of that is usually seen as more of a positive one is the Asians are good in school. They're good. They're the model minority is a term that's used for Asians, right? They're the model minority. They're smart. They're good at school. They don't cause trouble. They don't, they're looked at as kind of the standard for minority groups, which that is something that can be seen as a positive for certain groups outside of the Asian culture, Asian group, but that doesn't take into account, well, again, we are stereotyping and generalizing an entire population, an entire group of people as this way. So now what happens when someone doesn't fit that stereotype?
Right. So it's better to say than the many, based on if you have statistics that show that many of them are.
It's better to say many?
Yeah, than to just say Asians or say many if there are statistics to show that they are, or if it is not really, we can say some.
Yeah, I mean, for some things, yeah, obviously, for some things, if there is data or whatever to back it up, you can say many, or many or some, or whatever. Like I said with the comment I made where I said some Christians. So there is that you can use, but again, if we're talking specifically, if we're talking in terms of writing different diverse characters, we don't want to really rely on on having stereotypes, like I said, whether negative or if they're seen as positive. We don't want to rely on those stereotypes because, even unintentionally, it can cause harm, right? So, like I was saying, if, what happens if someone doesn't fit into that stereotype, or, what happens if, they're not someone who is good in school, or is seen as the model, right? They can then be treated differently. Um, uh, who's that? Yeah, so they can then be treated differently, which can cause harm. So, in general, I would say just especially if you're writing a diverse character, to avoid stereotypes, to avoid generalizations. And if this is, you're dealing with everyday person to person interactions, um, becoming more aware of different stereotypes that we may hold. Right.
Yeah. So, Vanessa, can you basically summarize then basically the main points that we have covered? Uh, so we spoke about
We talked
the-
about gender identities,
right.
pronouns,
Mm,
and we talked about different terminologies within different communities,
mm.
um, the disabled community, person first versus identity first. We actually covered quite a bit in this
Yes,
episode.
quite a lot.
Yeah,
And we talked also about the the right first person versus the
identity first.
identity, first identity. Uh,
And
the
the medical model versus the social model of
right.
disability. Um, we touched on stereotypes of different
Mhm.
groups. Um,
And misrepresentation, stereotypes and misrepresentations of
right,
those groups. We talked about intersectionality, how
yes,
belonging to different marginalized groups can intersect in persons getting jobs, what happens in how they're treated in the society at large.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
uh,
and also positive stereotypes because normally when we think of stereotypes, we tend to think of negative
right,
at the same time. But it's always good to have data and not just data, but also to look at the reasons behind, as we described, about Black people because of their marginalization economically. This impacts what this particular statistic say. A lot of Black single parent, single women have their children are in prison. Black single women, but it's because of this marginalization, and it's not because they have to pull it themselves by their bootstrap. They are trying the best they can, but when you have things going against them economically and laws and legislation like the abortion removal of abortion rights,
Mhm.
creating a serious problem in that case too, in that way, right? For black people, for black women.
Yeah, they're significantly impacted more.
Yes.
Black and brown women are, or people
Mm-hmm.
um, who can get pregnant are impacted
Mm-hmm.
a lot more. Um, you know, there's so many kind of different things we've touched on, and we kind of gotten we've kind of just touched the surface, bare surface,
Yeah.
everything that we could have talked on. And so there is so much more to learn. So I
Mm-hmm.
would just encourage anyone who wants to learn more, interested in learning more, um, to, get out there and just, one, do your research. Google is great for finding out a lot of different information, and two, just getting to know people that are different from you, um, speaking to other people in other communities, and getting to know them. Not expecting them to educate you on all these topics, of course,
Right.
just actually being willing to listen and hear people's stories,
Yeah.
and talk with others.
Mm-hmm. So where can we find you? Um,
Yeah, so thank you for having me here today. And so you can find me, I go by Vanessa Marie Books on pretty much all my platforms. YouTube, um, I have a Facebook page, uh, Instagram, TikTok. I don't
mhm.
TikTok is kind of random. I do a whole bunch of random stuff on there. But yeah, I've read some ebooks on all of that. And
Mhm.
if there are any writers out there that are wanting to learn more about writing diverse characters, I do have an online course that's available. It's in the link in the description.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I have that course, and I have an ebook if anyone is interested in writing disabled characters.
Right. So in the description in here below, you will see Vanessa's link tree that will take you to all of what she just said, all of her sites, all TikTok, the Facebook, all her sites. So yes, the link tree below. And please do not forget to like and subscribe. No, thank you, Vanessa, very much. You have really shared a lot of stuff and some things that we didn't even know. And I hope it has made us more aware and to be more cognizant of of how we speak,
Mm-hmm.
especially to people from marginalized groups, and really exhibit that humanism towards them, to to listen to them carefully, to use the terminology they prefer to be called or to be identified with,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, so we want to thank you very much, Vanessa, for sharing and enlightening us.
Yes, well, I was glad to be here and talk and share about this. So thank you for having me.
Is there anyone in the chat that has any questions? This is the final time. Any questions? I've not seen any questions. And we are now on the half hour, the 1.5 hour mark. I think we've really done well. So thanks everyone in the chat for your comments. Thank you for tuning in. And remember, like and subscribe. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye bye.